Yay.
Yay.
Yay. Adrianne, Adriana, all those names.
Right.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Oh, good, good.
I see you're wearing short sleeves or no sleeves. I'm jealous because it's still rather chilly here, which is a bit of a drag.
Remind
But
us of where you are. You're
I'm
not
in
in that.
Davidson. I'm at Davidson College in Davidson, North Carolina.
Yeah, world traveler. You are.
I am. I don't always enjoy it as much as it sounds like I might.
But you're on your way home to Greece in like about a month, almost a month to the day.
Actually, exactly a month now that you brought it up. May 20th today. Yeah, a month. Wow. That's
Woohoo!
wild.
That is wild.
Hmm.
Well,
Yeah.
happy travels to you for that.
Thank you. I've enjoyed my time. It's been intense. I came in an election year in the middle of COVID. I mean, what can I say?
Yeah, it's almost too much to even
Oh,
try to articulate, right?
right. It's been a ride. But I've enjoyed my classes. I've had wonderful students, and it's been a new space, which
Yeah,
is always something I invite. I think newness, for all its difficulties and its tensions, I think ultimately is a good thing.
right. Us too, us too. We're this concludes our first year in lockdown, and we're kind of looking towards a slight variation on that life coming up soon. But this
Mhm.
is an interesting course. As I mentioned to you, it's essentially a travel writing class. It's called Writing the Journey Travel Narratives, and we do a lot of reading and watching films and writing and working on journaling, which is new to some folks and totally not new to others. So we have a real range. And it's ironic, though. I mean, the irony of teaching a travel writing course in the midst of a lockdown
True.
is
Yeah.
challenging, and it really opens up, I think, our minds, in a lot of ways, and sort of opens up those conversations about travel as metaphor. The different kinds of
Yeah.
travel.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Every
Yeah. Totally.
And so we embrace memory and we embrace fantasy, like if
Hmm.
I could, this is where I'll go and I would go. Or, and a lot of folks are definitely talking about, oh, I have always dreamed of going here or there. But now that, go after a year of not being allowed to go anywhere, I'm going to make sure that that happens now, right? Not
Yeah.
wait, but just say, oh, I'm
Right. Right.
doing
Right.
it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's taught, you're right. It's taught us sort of the finite aspect of, our desires in a sense, our the ways we travel in fantasy as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, anyway, oh, by the way, yes, this is a class, and I just want to say hello, class.
Hello, class. Nice to see you all
Yeah,
virtually.
great to see and be seen, all
Mhm,
13 of you.
mhm, mhm.
And just so you know, Adrienne, our students are global. We have students from the international students, students all over the country, the US. Some are pretty local down the road from me, here in Arizona, but most
Mhm.
are definitely elsewhere. So anyway, everyone is delighted to have you, and everyone submitted wonderful questions, and we've been engaged in talking about several of your pieces, as you know. Uh, and so we did get a bunch of questions from everyone. As the class knows, I can only ask Adrienne one question per person, but um, all of them were great, and we appreciate them all. We just have time for one a piece.
Okay,
Okay?
great. Mhm.
All right, so we'll get started. And I'm
Yes,
actually going to open up my screen that has the questions. So you'll see me kind of looking away, but I'm right here.
sure, sure, sure.
Okay. So we begin with Christine. Christine has wonderful comments on all of the work that we've looked at together. She mentions right away, excuse me, uh, the journey where the epic journey where when she says, I felt that the most telling and interesting line that Adrianne has is, or at least the one that hit me right to my gut, was these were ports of connection more than destination. Um, Speaking of another piece, however, Christine says, I read the epic, truly epic, Wig and the Scream of Forensics. It felt as though it was a diary of moments that were
Hmm.
happening and we are catching up on it. Is this a poem?
Haha, Christine. Other people ask me the same question. Some people call it a poem. I don't know why. That's so interesting. I see it as a lyrical essay. Therefore, my definition of a lyrical essay is that it borrows from the lyric. So it would be, therefore, a kind of stanzaic connections, the way a poem would connect stanzas together. And I kind of viewed it that way. I mean, kind of like a kind of choral connection, the way a poem would connect in its lyrical various devices. So, but it's got the essayistic kind of tenor of a narrative, let's say, a narrative arc. And it does what I like to do in the essay, which is it weaves in different time spaces, and in this case, also time zones and geographies. So yeah, thank you, Christine.
Yeah, I love that piece so very much. And I love listening to you read it,
Oh, thank you.
because we get
Thank
to
you.
hear that Superstition Review actually.
I know. I'm so grateful to Superstition Review. They've supported me so often with essays that I've given and turned in, and I've been just really thrilled. I love you all. It's just a great. Patricia Murphy's done amazing things, and the students have who are the interns have supported. It's wonderful. It's
Yeah,
really wonderful.
it is, and it's such a joy to see you there. Talk about fusion for me personally, in my
Right, right. Our different moments. But going back to what Christine said about the journey where the portals of connection. Yeah, I think this new manuscript that I'm working on, which hopefully I'll finish this year, which has both essays in it, the working manuscript, is called The Re in Refuge,
Mm,
is the working title, because I looked up for a different essay what refuge, what is the re? Is it repetition? Because I was thinking, is it the return? What is it? And apparently the re is a reference to return, not repetition. And that fascinates me.
right.
So in a way, for me, connection is also a connection with the unknown, and
Mm,
how, the unknown can also put us in places where we don't always predict or control the ways that we connect. I think that's a very hopeful thing. I think we over control and overthink
mm,
ways that we connect, the framing of the ways that we interact, and particularly in a kind of global moment, or a moment when the world is, connected in this internet space, right?
right.
Um, I read somewhere something that I think Samantha Hill Rose said, because she's a young scholar who has a book on Hannah Arendt coming out soon.
Mm, yeah.
And she talks about all her teaching on, Zoom, like all of us. And she said something fascinating, which I agree with. She said, this is a new cosmopolitanism. So that's a new form of connecting, the unexpected connections that Zoom has given us.
Yes, right, right.
Yeah.
And I mean, just as an aside, I have found kind of a new world and a new space, as we say,
Yeah.
with Zoom. A lot of people hate it, and we all know that you don't like Skype,
Well,
right?
yeah, right. That was said before, like the Zoom or the internet
The
even
Zoom
took
era.
over. Little did I know that this is going to be the third dimension.
Right, exactly, exactly. And I had
I
felt the
mean,
same way. I didn't like Skype at all. In fact, I boycotted it, you know. In fact, you know, there were a couple of times over the many years. Oh, class, Adrienne and I have known each other for over 20 years. I
that's
used
right.
to, we used to live.
Talk about portals of connection,
All
right?
right, right. We taught together, we read together, we've been in conferences together, we've traveled together. But after I moved back to the States and Skype became a thing, I actually wouldn't do it. I, you know, love my friends that live far away, but Skype was something that it's something about it was didn't work for me either. But Zoom has, you know, since I've become reliant upon it, has opened up other worlds for me since then. So I don't know why I'm
Right. Yeah.
interjecting that, but
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
it's all
Yeah.
part of our conversation about all of this. And of course, the fact that our guests come to us via Zoom is really quite extraordinary.
I agree. I agree. I mean, I feel that way too. Like the readings that I've heard and the lectures even, and these would not be available to
No,
me or anyone,
no.
were it not for the fact of Zoom. So it's this weird kind of democratizing,
Yeah, exactly.
weird, kind of thing that's entered into our space. Now that's an example of the unexpected, I
Sure,
guess,
sure.
you know.
Well, we better move ahead because
Yeah,
sometimes some of these questions overlap. So, students, if
sure.
you feel like we're missing something that you've asked, there's a good chance that it'll come back. Okay, so don't worry about that. Next question is from our friend Jack, which is spelled Jacc, which I appreciate very much because I like to spell my name in a bunch of ways too. Jack is a football player extraordinaire. He's had many interesting stories, but Jack talks about how most of his traveling as an athlete, professional, semi-professional, or anyway, student, soon to be professional athlete, is limited to airports. And so Jack talks about that reality quite a bit in very thoughtful ways. Um, Jack says, for me, reading Adrianne's work, I realized that locations are all relative to the uniqueness of that person and their purpose for that location.
Hmm. Sure.
And so
So
anyway, I'm just going to go ahead with his question, but it is a very location oriented question rather than a kind of a writing question. It's more, what is the top city that you feel most affection for in Greece and why?
affection. Well, I think Athens, and especially living in Davidson this year, I feel like I miss Athens' gritty, urban, kind of craziness. So yeah, Athens is where and I like what Jack says about, I like what you say, Jack, about the location and purpose. I think sometimes, I'm here, for example, because my purpose is I'm here to teach, so the essay I wrote while I've been here has been about like the magnolia trees, because I see so many magnolia trees in the South, So I think, and I don't know what the purpose, but certainly a sense of location is connected to um, a consciousness of what I'm doing there and what I bring to that location, while I inhabit it. And, Athens I've inhabited in different moments of my life.
Yeah,
And it changed, it too, Athens as a subject, um, has morphed in so many ways given its various, kind of histories. So I like Athens's kind of dynamic quality too. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. I sort of miss it in ways that I can't even describe. I mean, it's sort of in my bones, you know.
Hmm.
Athens does that to you, but
Sure.
a lot of I mean, I actually, and I'm sorry I keep talking about myself. I tend to be sort of associative when talking about travel.
Of course.
um,
But
but
define travel.
that was one of the places in my life, and I was, you know, I was in my late 30s, turned 40 when I was there, and so I was not young. I mean, by most standards, but it was the first time I ever got completely and totally lost. I don't know if you remember when that happened to me.
Yes, yes, yes. I remember. Yeah, I know that story. It's
I was,
amazing.
yeah,
Yeah.
I was walking to work in the morning, like early in the morning, and I got so lost that I didn't arrive home until late at night. And
Wow.
and it was like a progression of bizarre, you know, things that happened differently from one moment to the next, and how I ever got back, especially as increasingly terrified as I was, and my Greek was so terrible. I just couldn't, you know, convey where I even was going whenever I would get somebody that would help me and so forth. So I have that in my memory too, which is really powerful. You know, not
Hmm.
just
Hmm.
a,
Hmm.
a sense of location, but a sense of lostness too. So,
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
um,
Hmm.
part of it, and we actually talk about lostness in this class too, Adrian.
Hmm.
So going to Frank now, and Frank is a very interesting writer, Adrian, and a huge fan of yours. He really loved all of your work, and he has thoughts about all of them. By the way, we have two Franks. This is Frank Rye. So I'm going to say, Frank, that these are all really good questions, and we just have to land on one. And since we're going to return to this subject with some other students, I'm going to go ahead and select this one, which is, when I finished reading Water, I had this heightened sense of anxiety and guilt, almost as if I was made aware of the water crisis many people face around the world for the first time. As I function in my daily life, I never stop and think that there are people in the world with no water. I am fully aware of the crisis, but nothing reminds me of it. That's an interesting line to me. Nothing reminds me of it. And this poem captured that feeling perfectly. Please talk about the idea of the poem Water.
Well, the idea is in the occasion for the poem, hopefully is in the poem, which was in the squat, a refugee squat in Athens during a time when there was an influx, a large influx of refugees coming in from Syria and other places too, Afghanistan and so forth. And they were coming in through the portal, was basically from Turkey to the islands, mainly Mytilene or Lesbos. And, you know, because the Greek government at that point was the socialist government, and this is Greece in an austerity mode in its own financial crisis. So there were no places to put people up. So the government was very tolerant of these squats where abandoned buildings were taken over by refugee communities who then turned them into places where, you know, they really were living. And, you know, we were helping out a group of us, but we weren't unique. There were other people who were working in these or helping out. And water was something being provided by, in a sense, the county. So it was quote unquote free in the sense that nobody was paying this bill. And there were about, I mean, at its height, there were about 400 people in this particular building that used to be an old schoolhouse that was abandoned when they moved in. And then I think what happened, the reason it was abandoned as a school was because actually of the plumbing. And so the refugees fixed the plumbing, or at least made it work. And then I think what happened is the plumbing or the the pipes got blocked again, and there was all kinds of crap in them, like dolls and shoes and crap, like I said. Anyway, they had to turn off, or the municipality turned off the water, because they also wanted the refugees out, because apparently there were some complaints by neighbors in the area, because this particular building or school was in a sort of high-end neighborhood. And the the people there didn't, I don't know, while they were mainly tolerant, some weren't. So they used the advantage of the lack of water to hope that people would leave. And we ourselves were kind of predicting that they would leave, because, I mean, you can't live without water. You can live without food, maybe, or you can live without food in intermittent ways, but they didn't leave. And it was so fascinating to see how this lack of water negotiated the faucet in a park opposite the squat. And so I would see, when I would go to the squat, families, people cleaning out their pots and pans in this little, under this little faucet in the park opposite the squat. And then they would wash, they would go to other places to wash. There were porta potties, toilets that we actually helped pay for, so that our group, so that people, had the toilets. But then we would go, and there was the stench and the sanitary question, health issue. That was all there. And it went on for a while, went on for about, I'd say, 5 to 6 months. And then, and there was a kind of war between the municipality and they opened up a pipe in the main road so that they could use some of the local water to, get some water going in the school. And then the municipality came one night and like cemented it all over, so they didn't have access. And, so there was this tension, this type of tension. But what was so incredible, and the reason I wrote the poem, was I was just amazed at the resilience and what we do when we, as a group, as people, as humans, need to survive. And unlike some of the kind of, what can we say, the projections that particularly sort of privileged groups will have on underprivileged groups that, will resort to a barbarism or whatever, it was quite the opposite. There was a birthday party, as I mentioned. There were things that people do, whether they find themselves in a suburbia or in a refugee squat. And so my point, and I guess part of the impulse or the hope of this manuscript I'm working on, is to show precisely that, that we're not that different from each other. Not to say that I don't respect difference, but I think it's been too often used as a kind of wedge, as opposed to, understanding it as an understanding of respect, for qualities of difference. I think we're more the same than we are different ultimately.
Wow. Oh, thank you. I actually have a ton of questions to ask you about that, but I think, again, they might come up.
Yeah, sure. In the questions. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
A
Mhm.
lot of people are very interested in exactly what you're talking about. But we'll look at Tara, who has a number of different ideas. Tara says, Adrianne, thank you so very much for taking the time to talk to us today. We all are very appreciative of your work. I
Thank
love
you.
your play on words with rupture. I've never thought of travel as rupture, but now
Mm.
it seems so clear. I love traveling, but I also find it challenging, and rupture seems to be the perfect way to explain that challenge. The unfamiliar is challenging to me. Usually, I like being in a routine and knowing what to expect, but the older I get, the more I realize I can never know what to expect. On another subject, um, your writings are filled with emotion. Do you feel you draw mostly on your own emotions, or do you draw from others' emotions as well?
Tara, thank you for that question. I actually, hopefully, I'm doing both. Um, I think my response, even my impulse to write, would be an emotional response. So, that's me. But then I think and hope I'm channeling while I'm doing that the responses and the emotions of the occasion that I find myself in. So, for example, in the time with the refugee communities, it's a tricky thing because I'm in the midst of people who don't speak English really,
Mm.
but we gesture and we share food, and they often invited me for meals, and they were just some of the most delicious, satisfying meals I've had, with these refugee families who made food out of nothing, very, very meager kinds of, resources. But nevertheless, like I said, some of the tastiest meals I've had. So do I channel? I mean, so I'm interested. I mean, I think one of the reasons I wrote these particular group of essays is because I was interested in, you know, how I felt almost as a foreigner in the midst of these places or spaces, so my emotions were not known to me. So I became my own other. Yeah.
Wow.
Mhm.
Okay, that actually moves, I think, in a way into what Virginia is asking here, what she sort of declares and what she asks. Um, Thank you, Adrienne, says Virginia.
Yeah.
I'm
Mhm.
interested in the surrealities. Oh, Adrienne writes, as she says, I'm interested in the surrealities, dislocated moments in gender. Ultimately, maybe those are opportunities too, a challenge to see otherwise, as in a gesture of hospitality to an unknown, a way to be in less conditioned ways that shake up our assumptions, to be dislocated from givens. Virginia continues, I love everything about this. To add on to my desire to leave comfort behind when I travel, I do so in my everyday life as well. Pushing one's own boundaries, questioning everything around you, listening to perspectives so different from one's own, stirring things up to see what it might look like otherwise, traveling through the experience of being human, existential traveling, if you will. Eventually, I lose interest in what I think of as comfort. What role does comfort play for you, Adrianne, in your traveling and writing?
Oh, Jennifer, I love that you bring up hospitality and the hospitality of the unfamiliar. There's a whole book, not very large, but an important book to me, that Jacques Derrida has, and he talks with French philosopher Anne de Fomental, who invites him to a conversation, and it's called On Hospitality, and it's put out by Stanford. It's a wonderful book. And so they talk about this more kind of philosophically, but yeah, I think when you invite in, as they say in their conversation, if you invite in the unfamiliar, there's got to be a moment of discomfort or an uncertainty, at least, Um, so travel is about that. Um, I think we, I think different people travel in different ways. If you're a tourist, maybe you want to take things with you that somehow represent where you've come from, or what you feel will help you negotiate that unfamiliarity. Even sunblock, like I don't want to go to a place where the amount of sun is so much that it's going to burn my skin, right? So that's a comfort, that's a but And one of the things the refugee women asked me for when I went to the squat was to give them some sunblock, because they had been exposed to so much sun on these dinghies and all that. And it was a quality of beauty, not to become, have these like brown, what is it, sunspots.
Yeah.
So yeah, I feel the same way. So, of course, it was like hair dye. So these are qualities of comfort these are elements of comfort that create or are part of how we maintain our human selves, or we see ourselves as. And so I was always really happy to share these products and, chat about them with my friends who were refugees. And they would tell me specifically the colors that they wanted, for example, for the hair dyes. And, sometimes the dye, we would run out of dye. And so then everybody looked kind of punk for a while, because like the hair dyes were doing weird things with everybody's hair, and it was kind of cool, you know?
I hope you took photos.
I mean, I have some somewhere, but I don't, it was just like kind of wild, and they were kind of pleased. So here's a moment where something unexpected, unknown, creates a whole different visual, let's say,
Right.
it kind of, everybody felt really kind of modern and okay about it, So how much does comfort, well, I think that's a really profound kind of question, Jennifer, because I mean, I think we all go, I don't think anybody wants to be completely uncomfortable, because I think our human nature is to, find that pillow to put behind your back if it hurts, or, get that, the food that you want, if you can have it, if you have a choice, or a pillow that, won't leave a kink in your neck. So I think that's all good and kind of human. But I also think that when something is uncomfortable, like when there was no water and there was a stench, and I knew people were peeing in parts of the playground, because it was just easier to do that than to go find a bathroom in a cafe. I was really uncomfortable, but I stayed, and we still played with the kids, and we hung out. So it wasn't my preference to do this with the stench of urine, but neither was it theirs,
Sure.
you know? So I think, yeah, I think it's a very complicated question, and I really think it challenges, our own kind of boundaries in many ways,
Yeah.
what we tolerate and what we don't. I mean, I think what's important in those moments is not to turn around and judge and say, okay, oh my gosh, look at these people. They can actually live among these, with this stench.
Yeah.
That's a moment that's problematic.
Sure. And it's not comfortable for anyone. Um, However, given the much larger context, where does that comfort needle fall? I suppose
Right,
with something
right,
stench.
right. I mean, it's a whole other conversation, but being in the States has been really interesting because comfort's a big deal. I think comfort's the second word that I hear most often. The first word is safety.
Hmm.
I hear those words a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those are very interesting things to think about during the
Pandemic.
period of pandemic crisis and lockdown, and
Yeah.
what it takes to be comfortable, and how do we surround ourselves with whatever it takes to make us feel comfortable and safe, since you mentioned.
And those are important things. I mean, I don't think we should, I mean, comfort is such a large, it can mean so many different things, but I think what's important about Jennifer's question is comfort as it connects to the sense of how we feel human is important. When comfort becomes a sort of consumer thing, like, I need to have 5 dresses because the 2, something might happen to them. So I want to make sure I have the other 3 just in case, Yeah, then we move into post-capitalist, stuff. Not post-capitalist. That was actually oh my gosh, I think that was like that was like a projection of what I hope. I meant late capitalist.
Uh, that's all of that is actually very interesting, and it's also funny too, Adrienne, because uh, about 2 weeks ago, to celebrate the advent of the new summer here in the desert, I bought 5 dresses.
Oh, good for you. Good for you. Good for you. I mean, yeah,
I'm wearing one of them for you right
pretty, very pretty,
now.
very pretty.
That just cracks me up.
But you didn't buy 5 of the same. That's what's important. Did
Well,
you?
they're the same, except that the colors are different. Otherwise,
Okay, well then they're not the same. Yeah, then they're not the same.
I'm writing a poem right after we're done here called 5 Dresses, and that
Okay, perfect.
I will blame you for all of it. All right, it's all
Excellent,
your
excellent.
okay, and good. That takes us. That's a super serious subject, and Caitlin is going to move us into a question about craft, which is nice, just because we're very
Sure.
interested in process here, and
Mhm.
especially there's so many different things that you do. Um, I had actually advised my students to avoid questions like, well, what do you do every day, in terms of writing? But I kind of think that's an okay question. Maybe we can blend it into Caitlin's question, which is, um, thank you so much, Adrianne. I sort of can't believe that you're actually talking to us. The things I would like to ask about are about your writing process. With a piece like, are you dressed for a party? How do you play with time? There's such a rich sense of history between the two people through the poem, but I was left with the feeling that it was all a remembrance in the span of a single exchange, and it was a magical feeling. A similar feeling is evoked in The Journey where the narrator is hurrying through time, a week, a day, but the world around her seems to be moving in a slower manner.
Caitlin, what an amazing question. And how perceptive. And I feel so honored that you've picked up on this use of time because it's a tricky one. And yeah, certainly it's something that I play with, and I'll often just on the level of intuition, practically. The exchange for dress for a party, why you dress for a party, or you are dressed for a party, is does happen. It's framed by one exchange in real time or in the poem's present, but it references other times, obviously, in the exchange between the two people in that. And what interests me, Caitlin, is the fact that two individuals bring with them so many histories into any encounter. And it's important to me that that encounter is if it doesn't engage with all those points of reference, that there's somehow a kind of acknowledgement even somehow of the fact that we all bring with us so many experiences and our own histories, let's say, plural, to what's a singular moment, let's say. So I'm very interested in how those singular moments are kind of just let's say brushstrokes that reference a bigger canvas. And the bigger canvas is always where I have half of my mind, I think, in a piece of writing.
Mm.
I like to make sure that that frame is there, that whether it's an airport or it's two people from two different histories who have a cup of coffee, or like in The Journey where a relationship that seems to be kind of afloat in this kind of liminality, let's say. um, I mean, I think that when they're not as nailed down in place and time, that invites the possibilities of being a kind of aware of what brought these people together. Okay, it's a little bit convoluted, but maybe Caitlin, that might help you. I don't know.
Helps me. Brilliant as always. Yeah, it's a very, very, very interesting. Um, yeah. Sorry, my mind kind of goes in like a tarantula, sometimes during these exchanges because there's just so many things to think about. And of course, these questions come from 13 different people,
Right,
and
right.
they're thinking about different things in different ways, but we're all
Sure.
led by you, and what you're doing for us, Adrian. Ariana
Yes.
says, greetings, Adrianne. I think the piece, The Journey Where, speaks to the idea of travel having a sort of rupture, as you say. Anything can happen to rupture your plans or your feelings that can feel ruptured as you panic trying to make your flight. It's also thrilling. Even the idea of going somewhere familiar has a sense of unknown. I like that. I actually really like that.
Yeah, I like that too. Mhm.
Yeah, something that we do here in other non-pandemic iterations of this class is that we do go someplace familiar and find something that we have never seen before, felt
Cool.
before, whatever, and it's
That's
an interesting
wonderful.
exercise. Can't do it, now, but we'll do it again someday. And it's also thrilling. The means by which you travel might be the same, but there's so many outside factors that can impact your plans. I think this is a great parallel to what Patricia knows. Patricia Murphy is also a guest with us here,
Mhm.
Adrienne, since you
Mhm.
brought her up earlier.
Mhm.
We
Mhm.
both know her well. The idea that travel is an adventure and the desire of wanting to be anywhere else is the driving force to why so many people travel, in my opinion. Specifically, if one wants to make travel their priority, the excitement is addicting. And amen to that, I have to say. Her question is, Ariana's question is, does the idea of rupturing and dislocation or dislocating drive your motivation to travel? So maybe the desire to rupture, in other words. Since you travel by choice, do you force yourself to feel these things?
No.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ariana, for your question. It's such an interesting question. No, 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 of course not. I don't force myself to feel anything really, except for maybe patience. When I lose my patience, which is, it's probably more often than I want to admit. Um, yeah, rupture is a kind of consequence sometimes of travel. And we all know this, I think, at least in the modern world. You can have a delayed flight, you can have a canceled flight, you can miss a flight. You can have other things happen, hopefully not, but worse things. So I just think rupture just becomes a quality of the texture of travel, and being aware of that can cause an anxiety. So I think the anxiety of potential rupture has a kind of rupturing effect, let's say. But I don't think anybody goes seeking it.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
I, that's very interesting. I mean, okay. I feel like there have been times when I have sought it. I don't know.
Have you've sought it?
Mhm.
Well, I mean, I think there are different kinds of travel. I think there are different kinds of travelers. I
Sure.
mean, people who go out to travel in unknown, like the desert or places that are objectively, challenging or even dangerous.
Yeah.
They do it with that consciousness. It's just not been my experience.
Sure, sure. No, I get that. It just makes me thoughtful, what you're saying and what these questions sort of engender for me. There's thoughtfulness about desire, of course, and you and I had talked about desire forever. But it is for rupture. I mean, there have been times that I felt that I consciously wanted to tear my life in half or in shreds or something, and get on a plane and go far away from my life and not
But
have
that's
contact.
different. Oh, I see. I see. I see. I was thinking more of the rupture within travel. You know, I think once you travel, things can happen. But to rupture a lifestyle that one's in or mired in is different. But that might be the impulse for that might be the catalyst for the journey.
It's just an interesting meditation, I think,
Sure.
some of
Hmm.
these terms are inspiring in terms of that meditations about that. I mean, I really care a lot when I mean, I came to Greece as a poet and I had no experience as a travel writer and limited experience as a traveler at all. I'd never been to Europe. I had, was very located in the United States, being an American, specifically being in Arizona and so th- so going from being a sort of located poet to being a traveler and then understanding about that merging, opened up a world of thought for me, and sort of musing and being able to assimilate these new experiences into my writer's consciousness, So that's where these questions and your answers take me.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
And a
Hmm.
lot of the students refer to rupture. Tyson is another athlete, very, very, very skilled, very professional career athlete like Jack. And um, Tyson says when I think about the idea of travel being a sort of rupture, I find myself reflecting on the idea that you lose your routine and your schedule when you plan a trip. And then Tyson moves into you had mentioned just now, Adrianne, about being in an airport. And, a lot of people talk about airports here in the class. We sort of look at airports as as really interesting places of conjunction, and Tyson says, I feel like after I read about, I feel like I read about Adrianne's describing airports as being a point of connection. I reflected to the time I worked at an airport
Oh,
and saw so many people in different walks of life. There were people there working to provide a living. There were others who were getting on an airplane for the first time. Some going on vacation, others going to funerals and family emergencies. It showed the different emotions of all gathered there and the idea of location. Do you ever write in airports or about airports?
all the time. I'm writing about one right now. Yeah, I'm writing an essay called Of Borders and Belongings, and going, when I left to go to Greece in the middle of the pandemic, for Christmas, my bag was overweight. And it was just, and in my book, Ruin, which is a book that has a lot to do with travel and rupture, the first essay in Ruin is about leaving Edinburgh and on EasyJet, where you have a certain amount of weight that you're allowed to carry. And I was taking books and, I was trying to negotiate the fact that I was being asked to pay some money for the overweight bag. And then, I tend to return, as we all do, to certain themes. And, the location of the airport is very kind of intrinsic to this idea of a liminal space too, for me, because I'm kind of moving between cultures more often than I usually choose or necessarily want to. But yeah, so I was leaving the airport here in Atlanta, actually. And, I was overweight. I had missed my flight and I had confused it because of the COVID. The schedule had changed several times. And and the person who was getting me on a new flight said, "You're $200 overweight." Because I was carrying all kinds of shit. I was carrying stuff from my friends, it was Christmas, I was coming from the States. Talk about a consumer me. I was just like, oh, they can't get like really nice Adidas shoes in Greece. So I'm going to bring a pair and I'm going to do this and that. Anyway, so I was $200 overweight and he didn't charge me. He said, you should take something out of your bag so that it's not overweight. And I said, I don't have space for a toothbrush.
Right.
I said, I will pay the money. And he was shocked. He said, I'm not going to charge you that amount. Now, this was, you know, it was his job. And it was just like this weird, and I felt like he was my like guardian angel because I was a mess. I had missed my flight. He was trying to get me into another flight. I'd had a PCR test. It was time sensitive. You couldn't go into Europe if the PCR test was over 48 hours. To even get a PCR test, you had to like plan ahead. So I was basically having a breakdown. And he said, and I realized that we were having this kind of hospitality exchange where I had to make a gesture to show that I respected that he was making this effort. So I took out, like, I don't know, a book. He needed me to make that gesture, that effort to sort of make this a lighter bag.
Wow.
And yeah. Thanks, Tyson.
That's an incredible story.
Yeah, that's what I'm writing about that now. I mean, I'm trying to deal with this idea of borders and what borders mean and why it's important to us to carry certain kinds of belongings with us and others not.
Yes.
Yeah, which goes back to, I don't know if it was Tara, but somebody asked me a question about comfort. That comfort question's kind of connected.
Right.
It's part of the comfort for me was to be able to provide certain things as gifts that couldn't be found in Greece, for example.
Yeah. Right. Another an entirely other subject to gifts.
Yeah, indeed.
Travel and gifts.
Indeed.
Oh, my poor brain. I'm not going to be able to do anything after this interview.
Well, do you have to?
I might have to go find, some Rhodian wine somewhere. That's good.
Yeah, I have some right here. I don't know. It's like,
oh my God.
Talk about travel. I went after class because I was teaching today. So I went after class and I was like to the local that has nice wines. And it said Aix, which meant Aix-en-Provence, which is France. And I visited and I was like, I'm going to get that wine. So I have a glass right here. But I don't want to drink it because I feel like I have to be able to offer it to you too. And
I know that would hurt me.
Yeah.
We've had lots of experiences that involved wine. I was just thinking of one this morning about, I don't know, we had a hard day somewhere at work or something. We were both just crazy.
Plug in.
And we went running into the cava closest to your house. We need wine now. And we opened it in the car.
Oh, did we? I don't remember this. Maybe that's a good thing.
It was so wrong. Kids, don't do this at home or anywhere else.
Right. Learn from your elders. Not that.
Actually, this group, these aren't kids, I have to say. It's easy to say kids, but they are not. Okay, we're gonna move ahead to John. Oh, John. John. Every time John writes a comment in a discussion, it is an essay unto itself, and it's always incredible. So I'm just saying. So it's kind of hard for me to distill the many thoughts that John has here, and his appreciation. He's a very solid reader. He's very well traveled, especially and is fluent in Romanian. He's traveled to Romania. He's a pastor, he's a minister, and he lives on our southern border. He lives in a town where actually I lived for a year, which is right on the border here in Arizona. And it's as you can imagine, a hotbed, as they say.
Yeah.
So I think we're finally going to kind of turn into that part. Okay, John, not to discard any of these other great things that you bring up. I will share with Adrianne one of the things that you say. Thank you for all these continuing important thoughts and meditations on travel. Ms. Kalfopoulou, uncertainty is a huge challenge for me. Even when traveling, I take efforts to learn some of the language, and for the most part, I have traveled through Europe when I could get by with German, English, or Romanian. I can read French, and that helps. I experience debilitating anxiety when I think about not being able to navigate the symbols of letters, lines, and marks that transmit a code. This anxiety maybe is a projection of my deeper anxiety about being out of place and lacking the autonomy to which I am accustomed. Do I want and need to depend on others? So, on the one hand, uncertainty has a romantic appeal. On the other, I feel anxious thinking about it and want to grab my books and bury my nose in them to ground myself before going somewhere. Speaking of anxiety, kind of an odd bridge I'm making. This is not John's bridge, but it is his question. Can you share more about negative freedoms and how they can be experienced in travel? Sorry to make such a weird transition there, but he's got so many ideas that
Yeah, I don't know what, John, you mean by negative freedoms.
I wish
If
he
it
was here right now. Is that
maybe the idea of choices, like not all choices are, maybe we don't invite to have the variety of choices that maybe you're suggesting by moving into other countries which are unfamiliar languages that are not our own, that we don't feel comfortable in. I don't know if that's a negative freedom. Certainly being a part of the real world, I mean, the free world, sorry. All worlds are real, I guess. But the free world, I guess, would suggest that we can't take certain things for granted, I suppose. Um, I'm not sure what that means myself as I'm saying taking for granted, safety. We want to all be safe when we travel, but we can't always be or know that this will be the case. Um, I don't think that should make us defensive and militaristic. I don't think the anxiety or the uncertainties of a border um, um, justifies weaponizing a border. I think the porousness of borders that can invite the more unexpected moments is just what a border is. I don't think a border is a wall. I don't think a border should be a wall. I think the idea of a porous border is the most honest and organic reality. I don't know if I just got through doing a seminar at Davidson on refugee literature, where we compared the Mexican-American border with the Middle Eastern. And we looked at the literature, both nonfiction, fiction, film. And it was really fascinating. The flows of people over time have been around since Homer. So suddenly to stop this or to impose these very punitive kinds of consequences, particularly on people don't generally, okay, I'm not going to segue too much here because it could go right off the deep end, but the punitive aspects of things don't really help make the border safer. I guess that's my point. So negative freedom, I don't know the context. So I'm just kind of.
I was wondering the same, and so I'm just going to throw it out there. Unfortunately, since John isn't here in the same time space that
Sure.
I'm going to throw it out for later, John. I'm kind of wondering. It's in quotation marks, and I wonder if that's your phrase or Adrianne's phrase. I assumed that you had found it in some of Adrianne's work, but I wasn't able to identify it. So.
Yeah, it doesn't seem familiar to me
Oh,
either.
okay. Well, we'll figure that out, and I'll ask John about it and get back to you, Adrian, and just see, just if you're curious. I'm
Yeah, sure.
But no matter what, that's a wonderful response, and engenders a lot of thought as usual. And Beatrice as well um, finds you very thought provoking. In fact, she's sorry, that was my phrase, but then she says, "Hello, Adrianne, your writing is very thought provoking and lends to many deeper reflections." And she has a series of questions. Um, I'm just going to go right to one, although it includes a couple of references that I can't guarantee will know. In the journey where, in one of your paragraphs, you say, "Or I talk of this since I'm reading an article in the New Yorker by Rafi," and I can't pronounce that.
Oh, yeah, I remember that article. I forget
Okay.
it. Yeah.
Who explains our inner worlds will become quantifiable.
Uh-huh.
Detecting human emotion with cameras and other kinds of surveillance technologies will mean, quote, "attention will soon be as quantifiably valuable as money and time." That's interesting. The rest of the paragraph goes on to mention about holograms, etc., which I know is an interesting topic to many of us, including to you, Adrianne, from what I understand. She says, pertaining especially to this quote, "Do you think Instagram and TikTok are perfect examples of this attention being quantifiably valuable as money and time? I do find it rather haunting." I could go on and on this topic, but what are your thoughts on this? I don't know if you're
Yeah,
familiar with Instagram and TikTok. I'm not. So
Beatrice. Yeah,
Beatrice.
Beatrice. Yeah, Beatrice. That's, really insightful, the connection you make with that idea of attention and social media. I don't know TikTok, I know Instagram. And indeed, the amount of time that we spent on Facebook or don't, or whatever, social media generally, whatever the platform is certainly time and time away from anything else, right? And it is, monitored, it's measured by those people who have these platforms, Facebook, for example, and so forth, or Twitter. And it's addictive. And so the whole point is that somebody was explaining to me that they want us, for example, to read the New York Times on Twitter or read the New York Times through Facebook, because then it means that Facebook owns that time. It's not the New York Times, that you open it up on their own sort of their own tab. And I often deliberately, when I find things either on Twitter or Facebook, I deliberately close the Facebook tab and read the article on its own tab for that exact reason, so that attention does not get clocked as Facebook time.
Mm.
Um, you
Mm.
know, and so the idea of how our attention is kind of policed, by these various social media gurus is it's disturbing, for sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure what Beatrice wanted me to say about that particular thing, but I agree with you, Beatrice, that it is indeed a form of, monetizing
Mhm.
our, our attention, because we look out the window and there's like, oh, here's an opportunity. What is she looking at? Cardinals? Oh, let's give her 5 cardinal ads. And I bet now that we're talking, I'm going to have 5 cardinal ads because this machine is listening to me.
Did that
And so,
sorry,
you
sorry.
know, and so it's
It really
weird.
happened with the Cardinals because you were talking about Cardinals on Facebook. So,
Yeah. And I suddenly have all these cardinal pictures. It's bizarre.
oh God,
Yeah,
that's creepy.
it
Maybe
is.
that's what Beatrice means by being haunted, because that's
Yeah, she's right.
being
She's
haunted.
right.
That's
Yeah, being haunted and being sort of surveillanced,
yeah.
like if I'm just looking at ads, this is part of the essay I've just finished writing about being here in the States. One of the things that freaks me out is the ads. So I mean, I'm as consumer, oriented as probably anybody, but there are times when I just want to read an article about something besides, Gap jeans, or have Gap jeans like fall over my, reading of the Belarusians and what's happening under Lukashenko. And I'm reading that and suddenly it's like, don't forget your opportunity. You have 5 t-shirts in your basket. So the attention interrupts, or since the students have brought up the word ruptures, my ability to concentrate. Takes me away from, thinking about Belarusia. And not to be glib, but it's the reality. And I'm like, oh, those jeans might be nice to buy. So these juxtapositions are things that I'm thinking about while I've been here. Because I mean, not that in Greece we don't buy our jeans and our t-shirts, but you don't have this relentless advertising that you have in this country.
Oh, right.
It is relentless. So one of the things I'm looking forward to actually is to go home and not have that happen when I turn on my internet.
Interesting. Thank you. Thank you both. We move ahead to T, who's her name is spelled Thy.
Okay, T.
T is has been in several of my classes. T is a wonderful reader and a wonderful writer. And so we're actually gonna go straight to a craft question or a process question, which I think is a good thing to have. As I said, I kind of asked people to avoid that question for some reason, but I'm glad T asked it. But first, just a quick introduction. That's part of her commentary in our discussion period about your work, and she is also very interested in the notion of rupture, especially the way you have introduced it to us, Adrianne. And she says the idea of rupture is what I've been alluding to and what I think about in my realization that the privilege that is encompassed in the word travel when it is being used to represent a vacation or necessary movement of employment is one thing. My very origin story begins with a rupture, the refugee experience of many in my family fleeing a war-torn Vietnam. I would not exist if it were not for the rupture and travel, if it were not for their illegal departure from the shores of their homeland, if they were not for their months apart at a refugee camp on an island they didn't know existed. I suppose a desire for strangeness is one perspective of the refugee experience. However, there are many words I would replace strangeness with. So that's just a portion of how sometimes T frames her thoughts.
Okay, I like that. I wish I could ask what the words that she would like to replace, or what words speak to her that are not like as a instead of strange or strangeness.
Right. I will pass that. She will hear you say that right now, and we'll find out. Okay. In the meantime, she's very interested in writing and making writing, being a writer. And I'm very happy to hear that. She would like to ask you a personal question, which is, what is your process once you have an idea for an essay? Do you write by hand first and then transcribe electronically? Do you utilize voice memos to record ideas and transfer? Do you utilize multiple methods? What is your favorite and why? And any other process notes would be greatly appreciated.
Oh, thank you, T. I'm interested in, your experience and your family's experience. I was born in Vietnam. I'm not a refugee, but my father is Greek, and he was working in Vietnam for an American trading company, and when the Vietnam War broke out, he was working in a place where he also knew, because he was a foreigner, English speaking, he knew a lot of people in the American embassy, and he was able to issue a lot of passports kind of overnight for his employees, the people who worked for him, so that families could get out during that period of time. You know, and yeah, anyway, it's really, yeah, the idea of strangeness, and you know, the idea of how somebody who's a refugee completely and consistently encounters a space that is never quite clear or settled is something that I've been thinking a lot about. You know, what that means to your own sort of emotional self and how that's shaped. That I'm interested in that, especially when I visit, this is another segue, for a year, a place where most people have had their careers for 30 years in one place, very located. They have a perspective that's not my own, for example, you know, somebody who keeps changing necessarily for work, usually. So process, I write notes, and lots of the notes are either on my iPhone, if it's something that I, you know, I have a lot of notes, so I use a lot of quick notes on my iPhone. And then I journal a little bit, you know, somehow the idea of writing something either in note form preserves a certain privacy of the process for me. I think it's important for me to spend time letting the notes kind of accumulate. And then I realize that there's something there and I want to turn these notes into something larger. But my process is very slow. I've spent over a year rewriting an essay that I started maybe a year and a half ago in bits and pieces. And the other essays in this manuscript that I hope I will complete at least as a draft, the whole manuscript this year, you know, have been in process. Well, Journey Where is the essay I will begin this book with. You know, hopefully it will be a book. And so Journey Where was written about like 3 years ago, or even 3 years ago, 4 years ago. So here I am 4 years later, still working on this particular manuscript, which won't be very long. I mean, it's about 6, 7 essays.
I don't know. That sounds a little sizable to me.
I've, you know, Rebecca, I haven't printed it all out. One of the goals I gave myself before leaving Davidson is that I would actually print out everything, because I have it all like electronically accumulated in a folder
Yeah.
that says the Re in Refuge. And, you know, I've never actually printed it to look at it because I won't give myself that satisfaction till I've completed all the essays.
Yeah. Is this memory correct? And this is so outside of everything. I'm sorry, it's just getting my memory jogged. But when we were in Athens, Agia Paraskevi, and I would stay at your place with you and Corina, and we would write and we would type it up and we would print it like mad. Didn't you have a printer there? And
I did.
printed everything, and it was just radical. I had never had a printer in my own, you know, domicile before.
Yeah, I mean, printing is a big deal, you know, and I haven't given myself the luxury of doing that for this manuscript because I've been frustrated with how long it's taken me to write it. You know, but I also think I have to be patient and allow it to take the time that it needs. And as a result, I see it now as an arc, you know. It wasn't, I mean, the refugee community and the refugee experiences that are part of this manuscript are not the only experiences of refuge. And now I've realized it's very important to me to define this much more broadly, the notion of refuge. And COVID has added yet another dimension, obviously,
Sure.
to this idea of refuge, right? So refuge from what? You know, we have this pandemic. We're all bodies in time and space. You know, COVID-19 doesn't care where we are, who we are, what color we are, how much money we have or don't, you know, although it is definitely targeting the underprivileged much more because they have less recourse to refuge, right?
Right.
You know,
Sure. Less recourse, fewer resources.
fewer resources. They, you know, if you're poor, you don't have access to decent food sometimes. you're being more exposed, you live in closer quarters, the whole thing has really, I think, decimated, all these assumptions, that we've, mistakenly had about our separations, we're really a collective and in a collective mess at this moment.
Right. Right. Well, we just have two more, if you can believe it, and I hope they're up for that.
Yeah.
They're actually, kind of gentle questions. They're not complicated, I don't think. Maybe. Who knows? Maybe I'm, um, sort of underestimating their complexity. But Angela says, and Angela is very succinct and honest when she says, I haven't been too sure if I understand the meaning of the word rupture yet, but I think I'm starting to get it. When you are jolted in the process of doing something new or going somewhere new, or just being somewhere new that isn't home, I got that sense while reading Water.
Oh,
Uh, clearly a big one for all of us, Adrianne.
yeah.
There are many things happening: children playing, women who want hair dye, nail polish, shoes being distributed. But all of this is not as important as there not being any water. And it's a big deal because people need water. That's right, Angela. And Angela says, I felt so sad while reading Water. How did the experience leave you feeling emotionally? Did you feel emotionally accomplished in some way, either by trying to help or by writing this piece?
Oh, Angela, thanks. Yeah. It was a tricky piece to write. In some ways, I wondered if I had the right to write it because I wasn't the one without the water. I left and went back to my apartment that did have water. So in some ways I wondered, what's my, position um, here as a witness? That was the, I guess the impulse is I'm witnessing something. And I guess for me, it was very important, I think, as I said earlier, to one of the questions, to show or to share this, what I had witnessed, which is that people still, despite the most basic, lack of a fundamental need as water, right? Resource as water, we maintain we maintain our humanity, not in pretty ways sometimes. There's that reference in the poem to finding shit downstairs in the basement, right? And, there are moments that are kind of gritty. But at the same time, people are living in these conditions and trying, nevertheless, to keep their humanity together. So I wrote the poem there were lots of emotions. I was angry. I was, very sad. But I was mainly probably the main emotion there was rage, that people had to live under these conditions. But there was also an element of awe that you can make it work, even in this case. And I was working with a group of people, who we were there together, and I knew that some of them didn't like the fact that I wrote this poem.
Mm. Whoa.
Yeah.
Wow. Sorry, you're going to have to say a little bit more about that.
Well, I felt a sense of judgment that I had put this on the map. Like, do we talk about
Okay.
this? We're there doing games with the children, eating meals together, doing the upbeat stuff. So what are you doing foregrounding this really painful reality? What's gained? Hopefully the poem is more nuanced. I mean, the idea was, yeah, there's this like part that's really, unacceptable.
Mhm.
But then, there's a birthday party, there's, this going on and that going on.
The birthday party is a mainstay. It is, very much the backdrop of this piece.
Yeah.
A lot of
The poem, I mean, I'm hoping that the texture of the poem is a little bit more complicated than just the occasion.
yeah, sure, of course.
Yeah.
It was, tremendously moving to us as a group. I can just.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Our last question is from our other Frank, Frank Zhu, and Frank's name is not really Frank. His name is to my great shame something that is hard for me to pronounce, and so my apologies to you, Frank Zhu. He knows that I feel badly about it, but he doesn't mind being called Frank. And Frank just has a sort of a simple question, but he'll lead into it this way. The idea of location is always very important to me. Actually, I'm going to back up for a moment because his actual question is so short that I think it's fine to have a little bit more introduction, which is, he says, uncertainty is definitely something I've always wanted to experience more fully. I like the sense of security if I plan when I travel, but what is uncertainty like? I like to know where I'm going and what it's like to be at the next place, but then I like to try new things as well. So maybe sometime in the future, I will try uncertainty. It could be fun, who knows? The idea of location is of extreme importance to me, not only me, but to most East Asians who feel the same way. The sense of home is one of priorities in our lives. We always say that fallen leaves will eventually return to the roots. In other words, to revert to one's origin. Frank refers to the notion of luxury and travel as luxury. And I'm going to paraphrase you here, Frank, okay? Just so that I hope I get to the gist of your question actually, and I don't mess it up. And I apologize if I do, but for me, travel was a necessity. Moving from one home to a new home, and the uncertainty there of not knowing whether I can return to my origin whenever I want or not, and when. For many, travel seems to be a luxury, especially in the midst of the coronavirus era. What are your thoughts on travel as luxury? And that's our final question for today.
I think it's great if you can choose to go places and, meet new communities and be introduced to cultures that are not your own. I think that's a wonderful privilege. And I guess one way to describe it is as a luxury. I think right now, and this is probably a good way to conclude, the idea of travel in any sense has become a luxury. We've suddenly discovered the luxury of travel as a massive privilege that we've lost because of this virus. So I think, even the ability to travel to family within a same country across state lines, see a friend, is we suddenly get this opportunity to reassess, the privilege of our need for each other, and to be able to travel to that space of friendship or family is something we may have taken for granted. Not if you're a refugee, that's for sure, and not if you're somebody, who's been separated from family, as takes place, as we know, from the border narratives that we know about. These are tragic contexts. But what I think the virus has taught us is that even if we are lucky enough and privileged enough not to be, the victims of a situation where we're separated from loved ones or people we care about, we've learned to reappreciate and consider it almost this what refugees have considered a luxury, to be able to live together with their families in a safe space, and not to be, hounded, by cartels or anything else, or poverty and so forth. I think we've realized, those of us who have the luxury of living in lives, or having lives that, take care of our basic needs, that that in itself is something to be grateful for and to consider a luxury.
Oh my goodness. I'm gonna do a different sort of. Did the view change for you, Adrianne, just now? What we're looking at together?
No.
No. Okay. Sorry. Anyway, I
I
just
just
wanted to say, wow, wow. Thank you so much,
Well,
Adrianne.
thank you all, and thank all the students. I wish I had a list of your names, but I remember all of the questions and your names, beautiful questions. Thank you for taking the time, for reading my work, engaging so sensitively with my work. I feel very privileged, and thank you, Rebecca, for sharing my work. Yeah, speaking of travel, our life travels brought us together, and we continue this journey,
Yeah.
through Zoom, for better or worse, whatever. Yeah,
Especially when at least one of us doesn't like it. I, since we don't like Skype,
yeah, yeah.
we weren't really doing that for the longest time. Even, when, and I'll stop recording in a moment, and I'll get this film out to everybody as soon as I can. But even over the past 20 years since I moved back to the States, although I did visit, came back and saw you and Spetses.
You did. I
Yeah.
remember, and you brought those beautiful Hawaiian necklaces. Do you remember that? You brought us a
Of course.
necklace of the shells. They were so beautiful.
Pukas. That was during
Yeah,
my Hawaiian period,
right. There you go.
another
Yeah,
island period.
another location.
That's right. Yeah, from a couple of islands out there. So, anywhere but here was sort of my mantra. But here I am here again. So, but
Good.
even over the 20 years that we were apart, you would come to the States often to conferences that I also attended. But even then, we weren't able to see one another because they would be so crazy and complicated, So it was always kind of a heartbreaker to know that you were right across town, or maybe I think there was even one time we were in the same hotel and we couldn't,
It was crazy.
we just
Yeah, those were,
couldn't do it. Yeah. But
yeah,
anyway, see, all it takes is a little home time and good old fashioned technology.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So anyway, I love you and I thank you so very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Sure. And I'm going to stop recording right now, students. So I will get you your video really soon. And I sure do thank you guys. Wow. Thank you. You make me proud.
Thank you.